Yeah, okay.
Just read it. I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give this honorable legislative assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Very good talk. Good afternoon, Miss Andrea, and thanks for finding the time to come. This afternoon we're dealing with the workforce planning and management in the Cayman Islands government, the Office of the Auditor General report dated April 2018. So we have the committee has some questions for you. Mr. Saunders.
Thank you,
Before you, 1 minute, sorry, just housekeeping. Before you answer the first question, just say your full name and what you represent, just for the record. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. A lot of the answers, the morning session was actually quite extensive, so we don't expect to have you here as long. But one of the things we just like to get a better grip on, one of the questions that came up, well, one of the issues that I raised was the use of consultants. You saw the report. We spent $34.9 million over a 5-year period. And one of the things that we want to kind of get a grip on is in terms of the training and the development of people within the public service. Because one of the things that we expect is that over time, the use of consultants is something that would decrease as we upskill and bring more talent within the civil service. So in a nutshell, the question is, what plans do you guys have in terms of training and development and getting civil servants ready in anticipation of future needs? Thank you.
Andrea Fatamoy, Acting Chief Officer of the Portfolio of the Civil Service. Mr. Chairman, in terms of our use of consultants as they pertain to training and development, we do employ different consultants or different training facilitators around the island.
Sorry, no. One of the things, sorry, that's the, not the use of consultant for training, but within the civil service itself, there was a lot of usage on external talent. And what the question is more geared towards, what are we doing to replace the need for external talent internally? So it's not a matter of using consultants or training, but rather to develop those skills within the civil service as opposed to going outside and getting a vendor to provide those services. Sorry if my question wasn't clear.
Mr. Chairman, the civil service has been doing intensive training across various disciplines. which should eventually reduce the need for the hiring of consultants. For example, we've been, and I too am part of the group that's currently doing some training for certification for business case writing. I have other colleagues who are doing for project management and the like. I would imagine that the need for consultants will decrease as we go along, but of course there will be the inevitable specialization that will require overseas or perhaps external to government, as those services are not ongoing. It could be perhaps the need is ad hoc, so there's no need to have somebody on staff full-time to deal with a particular type of service. We also, in the civil service, over the past few years, have been hiring individuals that are already well qualified for the post that they are coming into, and our hiring practice of taking on even uneducated or just high school level graduates was reduced due to the moratorium issue, the freeze on hiring in the civil service. So the need for consultants in very finite areas will continue in the foreseeable future.
What is the process that you guys currently employ to identify the high flyers, the talent, those with really great potential? Like, how do you guys find or identify this talent throughout the civil service to say, you know what, here's a future, you know, chief financial officer, here's a future chief officer, kind of thing?
There are several different types of leaders in the civil service. There are those that are there because of their positions, and then there are those that are identified by those individuals in position, as well as some that are identified by their peers and are sort of recommended and pushed forward. We've been doing a lot of work this past year on leadership training and development. We've been having different seminars and conferences and workshops. We've had individuals that were identified by chief officers and HODs and chief HR officers sent overseas to represent, or rather to gain greater insight on leadership activities and their leadership training. In Canada, we've been doing a lot of work here over in Cayman, and those that have been taking part in that were those positional leaders, those that were the recipients of various chief officer awards and the deputy governor awards, who of course were nominated for those positions and then voted to be the monthly or annual winner. And then also individuals who by their very performance, chief officer nominated or just from their on-the-job performance are recognized as green shoots. That's individuals with a bright future, or currently performing at the level of and displaying the leadership qualities we recognize.
Mr. Chairman, through you, let's say in a particular department or a ministry where you have a European, I'll put it that way, who seems to be holding back young Caymanians who are bright, and they're getting awards outside of the establishment, but not on the leader's recommendation. So you have young Caymanians getting recognized all over the place, but their leader does nothing because, of course, they don't want to go back to the jolly cold country. What do you all do to identify those Caymanians that are going to be held back by a leader that doesn't really want to bring them through? How do you all get around that problem? Because the facts are there, the identification is there, it's all in the public's eye that these people are the Caymanians are doing a good job, but not on one recommendation from the leader and who is head of that department. How do you get around that?
Mr. Chairman, there are many ways that an individual can be recognized, and if an individual feels that their efforts at promotion are being stymied by their immediate manager or supervisor or chief officer, they do have the wherewithal to perhaps seek alternative employment within the civil service. You no longer need your supervisor's sign off or approval to change jobs. And even if they don't want to change their respective field, if I'm an HR professional in one...
1 second. They may be qualified in one field. If you're a doctor, you can't go over and be a fireman. So...
Mr. Chairman, I completely understand that. So what I was getting at was that if I'm an HR professional, or if I'm a doctor or in a particular unit at the hospital, well, it wouldn't be the hospital, but let's just say I'm an HR professional working in one ministry or one department. I feel like there's no room up for me to move upwards. Jobs are and postings are advertised. They have to be open to recruitment. If not externally to the civil service, jobs will be, or postings will be promoted internally. Individuals can apply to move over. There's also the opportunity, and I know this is a fact because in the portfolio of the civil service, we've had individuals who were, for lack of a better word, unhappy with their current post doing their current job. They were able to transfer, to work out a secondment and transfer in. Some people have remained there, other people have moved on and just made themselves known to other leaders across the organization who will then potentially recognize their capabilities.
Okay. Before you came here today, we had the acting deputy governor. She said something that was good to hear, that longevity did not necessarily mean that, like in the past, that's how you got promoted and so forth. But then when you hear other people that will say about the one or two people who have made themselves shine, gotten results in spite of everybody else failing, oh, they're young. They're young. So are you on the same page with the acting deputy governor that age has nothing to do with it? Results, qualifications, and we know being Kimanian can be a hindrance, but put that aside. All those other things, those things in place, you all will identify and help those people, is what you're telling us. They're qualified, they're getting results, attitude good, not missing work, all the things that you want to tick off the boxes. Those type of people that go-getters and that are the green branch or whatever you call it just now, those are the people you need to, that you all try to identify and try to push forward. That's what you're saying.
The civil service is a very diverse organization, and
it's a simple yes or no. Those are people you're looking for.
If they're known, yes, we will.
Thank you.
Do our
That's
job.
all I need, ma'am. We know what the civil service is all about. I was one for 20 years. He was one, so we all know. So thank you very much, ma'am.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. First of all, good afternoon, Ms. Fatmore. Nice to have you with us. Thanks for taking some time. I trust you have a copy of the Auditor General report on workforce management in the Cayman Islands. All right, I'm going to draw some reference to it. The questions I'm going to ask relate to pages 1, 3, and 9 of the executive summary. Looking at page 1, I think it's the 4th paragraph, it reads, in May 2017, a new government was formed as a result of the general election. In August 2017, it set out its ambitious and strategic outcomes. Strategic goal number 8, which is not contained in the Auditor General's report, but was in fact included in the strategic policy statement, which was delivered in this House on the 23rd of August, calls on the government to recognize our responsibility to ensure effective governance through stable, effective, and accountable government. On the AG report, page 1, it says, both the government strategic plan and strategic outcomes depend on staff or people, Mr. Chairman, to deliver them. This therefore requires government managers, page 3, second paragraph, to have robust analysis of anticipated staff numbers, or in other words, having the right people and the sufficient resources to do the job, as well as the skills required to deliver the services. In other words, they receive the proper training and are capable at performing the tasks set to them. Another vital responsibility for government managers that is equally important can be found on page 9, bullet point 8, which is clear and competitive pay strategies. Page 9, paragraph 8 says, in 2016, government salaries ranged from $18,492 to $186,696. However, the majority of civil servants were paid at the lower end of the salary range, with 70% of staff earning less than $50,000 a year. Now, this was pointed out as a deficiency and was found in the first recommendation made by the Auditor General Office on page 43, whereby they identified a need to develop a workforce management plan. The government, or the management of Portfolio Civil Service, in their management response stated that they would move forward in actioning this Auditor General recommendation through their 5-year strategic plan. We see that that 5-year strategic plan, which runs from 2018 to 2022, commenced on January of this year. I wonder, Mr. Chairman, therefore, if the Acting Chief Officer can outline what progress, specific progress, has been made during the last 10 months of this year in relation to developing workforce planning framework, to clarifying roles and responsibilities, which includes succession planning, which, as we have heard here today, is something that has been weak in delivering, as well as the pay scale harmonization, which would otherwise lend itself to staff retention. If you can speak to what progress has been made in these key areas, again identified by the Auditor General's report during the last 10 months.
Mr. Chairman, the Office of the Deputy Governor, which the Acting DG may have spoken or drawn reference to, as well as the SRI unit, both under a part of the portfolio, produced a position statement, but in terms of readiness assessment, that has not yet been ready, and it's anticipated that that readiness report will be available by the end of this year. At this time, I think I should say that the 5-year strategic plan has many components, as you're well aware. And for this year so far, we've been doing, the majority of our work has been on leadership development and on customer service enhancement. So there is not a lot I am able to say about that at this time. I can take it as a personal plan to get some more information and find out exactly where they are now with this process development, but I do know that it's not expected to be ready until the end of the year.
Well, thank you for that answer. And whilst not necessarily criticizing you personally, you can appreciate the somewhat disappointment that I may have in that what tends to happen is the Auditor General does a report. They go through rather detailed and comprehensive recommendations for which there's a management response, basically a recommitment that we acknowledge the deficiencies in which you have identified and pledge ourselves to addressing them in due course and setting out a time scale. Whilst not to minimize both leadership development and the importance of customer service, those two things fell Rather far down on the list of identified priorities as addressed by the Auditor General is when they identified gaps in the civil service in workforce planning. The key priorities, again as identified by the Auditor General's report, was workforce planning, clarifying roles and responsibilities, in other words, persons understanding the jobs that they have and why it's important, receiving the proper training so that they can get it done, and of course the major issue of staff retention. We heard earlier on in the HR report, some 500 plus civil servants left the service for a variety of reasons, but presumably pay scale and lack of knowledge of what their job was were among the majority of reasons why. So therefore I ask again, whilst we have a 5-year window to complete and develop a strategic workforce plan, why do we opt for the lower scale priorities instead of starting with the key priorities which have been identified as the reasons for inefficiencies, duplication, and in some cases expanded costs?
Mr. Chairman, we have just conducted our second engagement survey of staff, and there were a number of areas of concerns that were highlighted from the first survey. Among those were issues with management and leadership, and therefore that is why, or part of the reason why, we as an entity decided to focus on that. Absolutely, the pay issue was of major concern, but when the entire engagement survey was analyzed, while everyone wanted or desired to be better compensated for the work they did, it was not the overriding factor for civil servants. People don't typically join the civil service to make a lot of money. There are other factors at play. Of course, we all want to be properly compensated and all want to have a good life and enjoy ourselves, but overridingly, the issues that were of greater concern to civil servants were issues with lack of communication. They felt they didn't know what was going on in the civil service. They had to go online to a blog or pick up a newspaper to see what was happening. There were also issues where they felt leadership was lacking in certain key areas. Money definitely, compensation definitely was an issue, but it was not found to be the overriding issue.
Thank you, Acting Chief Officer. Whilst I believe it is important to conduct exit surveys on persons who are leaving the civil service, the purpose of the Auditor General's report was to identify gaps and make recommendations. And therefore, whilst it may be a concern of lack of leadership for those who are departing the service, it does not address the key areas of focus outlined in the Auditor General's report, which brings us here today. Paragraphs 29 and 35 state that the civil service does not have an overarching workforce plan that sets out information on its current workforce or what that workforce should look like in the future in order to successfully deliver government objectives and deliver quality services. We don't know where we're going. In some cases, we don't know where we come from, hence the reason why we keep making some of the same mistakes over and over again. And these are the points that the Auditor General is drawing attention to, but we are focusing on leadership development and customer service. The Auditor General go on to say that there is no corporate approach to workforce planning. Some departments have started to think about workforce planning for the medium term, but because there is no standard approach, it is being done inconsistently and oftentimes on an ad hoc basis. These are the reasons why the 5-year strategic plan was initiated in January 2018 to address these key significant gaps, not to address the gaps as seen from the perspective of departing civil servants.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the first steps in putting together a workforce development plan is to analyze market data, look at the different data available. I'm just curious in terms of what sources or what information that you guys are gathering in order to, I guess, develop your implementation plan down the road.
Mr. Chairman, there's been a lot of work behind the scenes with members of the portfolio of the civil service and different ministries and departments. This year, we chose to focus on 10 key departments, and there have been a lot of consultation between POCs and those departments in terms of what their needs are and how we can better fulfill those needs. In terms of training and development for workforce planning, a lot of what the development is being conducted on different levels. Not all training that takes place in the civil service comes from or via the portfolio of the civil service. Each ministry and department have their own training budgets as well. Where we get involved is primarily where the effect will be seen across the board. So for example, we will identify if there's a certain policy being delivered or going to be launched. We will work with the key individuals that are sponsoring that policy. So for an example, there was recently the anti-fraud policy that came out. We worked in this portfolio, worked with those individuals and created training, bespoke training that dealt specifically with the issue for the Cayman Islands government and launched it across the entire service. So other training that we do offer, other development that we do offer is bespoke. For the finance and accounting individuals, we received some requests for Excel, something as simple as Excel for financial individuals. So that was offered across the entire service. All CFOs were contacted, and they then provided the names of their team members who required this training. We've been doing some development training for individuals from chief officer level down through UCCI and a different university in the US to offer them an executive certificate program. We've been creating different cohorts of learning, so like-minded individuals not only in the same industry but also potentially at the same level where there can be greater discussion taking place. We've been doing that sort of thing.
So I think what we're trying to get to is doing that to achieve what? And I'll explain to you shortly. This is one of the notes that came from the Auditor General, where it says, there's no organization-wide workforce plan for the civil service. Neither do ministries nor departments have workforce plan. There's no agreed approach to workforce planning, which means that where it is being considered is being done on an ad hoc basis. The approach to workforce planning has largely been driven by funding and is rarely linked to a robust analysis of the anticipated staff numbers and skills required to deliver service and outcomes to service providers. It goes on to say the roles and responsibility for workforce planning are not clear. The civil service has a network of HR professionals across government, 55 in total. However, they tend to focus on operational rather than strategic activities and have no specific role in workforce planning. There is a scope to develop a functional leadership approach across the government. What we're trying to get at is we recognize the operational issue, but what we're trying to dig more into is the strategic. So for example, the end of last month, the Ministry of Tourism ended its consultation for its draft tourism plan in terms of what they expect over the next 5 years. So the question in all of this is, what skill sets then, or what process would you guys go through to kind of prepare ministry staff and people under that portfolio to meet what is required from the Ministry of Tourism. And the reason why I raise it, if you look even within the use of consultants, the overseas advertisement, granted, it's was a significant spend. But if we're going to be spending that much money, millions of dollars each year, then at some point the question has got to be asked, do we want to develop this talent in-house, or is it a situation where we want the talent to remain external? But what we're more looking for is strategic responses as opposed to more operational stuff. That's what we're trying to get to. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, I completely understand. One of the things we've also been working on is creating these different advisory groups with the heads of profession and professional or vocational teams. So, for example, we have been working with the human resources team, finance and accounting team, the communications team, and procurement team just to get it started. In terms of human resources, the chief officer for the portfolio of the civil service is actually the head of profession for that team, and other members will include other chief HR officers, perhaps some operational officers. And for procurement, it's the director of procurement and individuals from different ministries and departments that are heavily involved in procurement. In terms of communications, there is a new director of communications that was hired for the civil service. She is considered the head of profession and has compiled a team of other professional communicators across government, and they can range from those that work in electronic media to PR and corporate comms or the equivalent. For finance and accounting, the accountant general would be the person named as head of profession, and other members on that team will be CFOs and deputy CFOs and other individuals in line. What we want to do with those teams in the portfolio of the civil service is to identify, for them as the professional experts, as the experts in their area, to identify the needs, the commonalities, the deficiencies, and so that we can then start working to satisfy the demand or to fill any gaps with training. We have, that process is heavily underway with communications. I know that communications director has been meeting quite frequently with her team or members of her team to set up, to see what the gaps are and to identify training that is required at each level, so that if a newcomer or a young individual or perhaps someone new to that field, where if they start off at the bottom or if they want to get into that field, they will see what skills and quals are required along the way. The same thing will be done for each industry, if you like, in the civil service, each profession.
Thank you, Ms. Andrea. I like that response. And the reason why I asked that question was that the chief officer, well, Ms. Gloria that was here earlier, is a person I have a lot of confidence in terms of what she's doing with the portfolio of the civil service. And what I wanted to make sure of is that you are all on the same page in terms of what still needs to be done. Now, one of the things that ultimately and eventually, because this is something that we definitely will be revisiting next year, God's willing, is the strategic direction. Because there still seems to be a lot of operational issues that is being focused on. And the whole idea behind workforce planning is to anticipate what it's going to be like in the future. So it's not just a matter of opening fires today, but the fires that we're going to be seeing coming tomorrow. And that is ultimately the message that we want for you and your team to take away from this session, is to start looking futuristic. Because we have spent too much time looking backwards, and we have spent too much time looking today. And I say all of this to say, last year during the budget process, we had raised the issue with DEH and the amount of money allocated. And I remembered it because they literally had to stop. They couldn't answer the question. They had to pause, meet in the back room, and then go through all of these numbers with me. And the same issue that we raised then was exactly what turns out to be the challenge that DEH have today. So this is stuff that we saw coming, and we feel more comfortable when we see the people who are charged with these day-to-day type function being on the same page. And that's really what we're looking for, is to not just today, but looking into the future. So for example, I mean, you look, for example, at police. Police is still one department that still is majority non-Caymanian. The question is then, what is being done to address that? Because I can tell you, come 2021, this is something that's going to be an issue. You look at prison, it's the same issue. You look in the Department of Education, you see the same thing. Now, HSA may take a little bit more time in terms of the number of medical profession because of how long it takes them to train a doctor. You have a doctor ready. But in terms of putting a Caymanian in a police uniform or a prison uniform, is not rocket science. And then the question is, what's being done now in order to start getting more people Caymanized? Because if you look at the numbers themselves, the ratio of Caymanians and even the growth have been more on the non-Caymanian side than on the Caymanian side. And this is a trend that really cannot continue. So the question is then, and what we're looking for, you may not have an answer today, and that's fine. But what we want to make sure is that you leave here today at least knowing that come next year from now, that this is something when we get the next HR report, we expect to see the numbers at least trending differently. But you can't be having 178 staff, of which 70 is Caymanian and 108 is non-Caymanian over an 18-month period. That is unsustainable. And that's what we're really looking for, because at the end of the day, you look at the problems at DEH, same issue. You could have seen it coming. And if you look at the numbers, there were 14 leavers at DEH over the last 18-month period. I remember serving me right. So 14 people leaving over the last 18 months. So where you replace them with people who can't get the job done, I don't know. But again, these are the kind of issues that we need to make sure that you guys are focusing on.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that answer. And while in the civil service, while in the portfolio of the civil service, we may not have been focusing on the roles as in our CIPS or DEH. For this past year, we've been heavily focused more on the professional side of things in terms of the accounting, the HR, the procurement, the communications, and the like.
Okay, go ahead.
One of the things that I just want to expand on, because this is where the disconnect comes from. If you look at, say, for example, the balance scorecard, you look at the 4 quadrants, you got the financial performance, your internal processes, your ability to come up with new products, but then customer service. For where we sit as elected representatives is on the customer service side. And so even if you weigh those quadrants, your internal processes are good, but ultimately it is your output. And that's the reason why the Auditor General has raised in the past, rightfully so, that we need to move the budget from output to outcome focus. Because right now, there's not enough emphasis on outcome, and what we're trying to change is that mindset. We're trying to change that culture that focuses more on the outcome as opposed to the output. So the staff surveys are fine. I mean, I can tell you up front which department is performing, which isn't. I can tell you based on the levers which one has good managers and which one doesn't. But the bigger issue that we also have, which was addressed earlier, is the turnover among senior civil servants. Basically, not enough of them is being turnover reflective of what the organization looks like. Because based on some of these numbers, some people should have been let go a long time ago. But for whatever reason, they're the ones who stay. And as Gloria said rightfully, people don't leave organization, they leave managers. And as long as those managers remain, you will have 542 people leave over an 18-month period. I mean, granted, some of them have different reasons, but 15% turnover rate over an 18-month period is quite high, especially if these are people that we have already invested money in terms of training and development, and they go elsewhere because you have a bad manager. That's the reason why we said in terms of even exit interviews, we want those done independently from the department, because the same bad manager will sit down there and control the narrative of what the employee is saying on the way out. So what we also wanted to focus on, and we think will make a big difference going forward, is the overall governance structure. I mean, the law is very clear in terms of the duties and responsibilities of the head of the civil service, which is where the pox fall under. And what we're looking for now is more teeth and more accountability in that side going forward, because as you can see, you have 70 entities in the HR report, but there's only one department here that's answering all the questions. So ultimately, if you guys will be the one that's facing the firing line, then the other 69 need to recognize that you guys need the answers, because you're the one who have to take the questions.
Mr. Chairman, through you. I've been asked on numerous occasions, too many to count, about the civil service training school or whatever you call it. Now, it was discussed here in Parliament the last term and is on the Hansards. The questions I asked was very simple. We get someone come from overseas on a contract. You have the Caymanians working below them. The Caymanians are going to the civil service school to get themselves qualified to move up. But at the same time, the person who's on the contract also goes to the civil service school and moves the bar a little further that us Caymanians can't get. Now that's bad enough that that's in place and no one seemed to want to address that. But now I'm having people in the authorities asking why is it that they cannot take part in the civil service school? Why can't they benefit? They're still civil servants, they're still Caymanians. Can this be looked into? Because at the end of the day, it's our people, it's our money, the least we can do is invest in our own people. Can that please be looked into? And if it's, because this is what I've been told by at least 3 different authorities, people in different authorities. Mr. Bush, I want to go to the civil service school, but this says we're an authority, we can't go to it, we can't attend it, we can't benefit from it. Maybe it's something that you all should look into, because like I said, at the end of the day, these are Caymanians, and you cannot put a price on education for our own.
Mr. Chairman, the Civil Service College offers a number of different training opportunities for all civil servants. For public servants, these are individuals in the authorities, we've only been able to have some be made available because of cost. It's simply an issue of dollars and cents. In recent times, we've had the public authorities, they have been invited to, at least the senior leaders have been invited to participate in our leadership conferences. Over the past month and for another couple of weeks, they, throughout the ranks, have been invited to participate in training that is taking place in the Cayman Islands offered by the Caribbean Development Bank. While we didn't have to pay for the facilitators, we're housing them, we're providing meals for them every day, and because of the timing and the types of courses that were available, we opened it up to the authorities. The complaint Mr. Bush shared with us, I too have heard, and it's predominantly from Caymanians that work in the public sector that want to take courses that want to earn their associate's degree in public administration. This is a program that we've contracted out, if you like, to UCCI, and because of the costs involved and the size of our budget for our core civil servants, we found it impossible to continue to offer it to everyone, to individuals in the public authorities. In some authorities, I have explained that they can take it, but perhaps their employer can subsidize the cost, or if they have proven to be good students working full-time and civil servants and Caymanians, there are scholarship opportunities for them. It is not necessary for them to just attend on free of cost through the civil service. We frankly just cannot afford it. Since I have been in the portfolio of the civil service, the budget, with the exception of this past year, has decreased for training. We had to focus solely on our core civil servants in this program, as it was felt that the authorities had their own training budget and their own means of taking care of their teams.
Ms. Andrea, thank you very much. Seems like they've exhausted their question, so you get your free card, get out of jail card. But thank you very much for taking the time to come. We appreciate it, and we appreciate your frank answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the meeting is adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, when we'll be dealing with the Financial Secretary as Chief Officer.
Phase of it, the afterthoughts and so forth. But if you can